The bodies of the hikers were discovered scattered across the frozen wilderness, half buried beneath layers of snow that had slowly covered the mountains for weeks. Search teams moving carefully through the icy forest suddenly stopped when they saw the first body lying near a tall cedar tree. The young man was dressed in only thin clothing despite the brutal winter temperatures. Nearby, the remains of a small fire were visible in the snow, as if someone had desperately tried to keep warm in the freezing darkness. As rescuers searched further, they began to realize that this was only the beginning. More bodies would soon be found across the silent landscape, each discovery raising even more disturbing questions. A short distance away, investigators discovered the hiker's tent on the slope of a remote mountain. What they saw immediately deepened the mystery. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Instead of leaving through the entrance, the occupants had sliced through the fabric with knives as if they were in a sudden panic and needed to escape immediately. Even stranger were the footprints leading away from the camp. The tracks showed that several of the hikers had run into the freezing night without boots, some wearing only socks and others completely barefoot. In temperatures that likely dropped to -30 degrees Celsius, no experienced hiker would willingly step outside like that, unless something inside the tent had terrified them more than the deadly cold. This chilling event would later become known as the Mystery of Dyatlov Pass, one of the most puzzling and haunting incidents in modern history. The story began weeks earlier, in January of 1959, when a group of adventurous young hikers set out on a difficult winter expedition deep into the snow-covered wilderness of the Ural Mountains in what was then the Soviet Union. Most of the group were students or recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, and they were known for their passion for challenging outdoor adventures. The expedition was led by a disciplined and determined 23-year-old engineering student named Igor Dyatlov. Dyatlov had carefully planned the journey. The team intended to travel through forests and across frozen valleys before reaching their final goal, a remote peak called Otterton Mountain. The route was considered difficult but achievable for experienced hikers with the proper training and equipment. Each member of the team carried heavy packs filled with food, warm clothing, cameras, notebooks, and survival tools designed to help them endure the harsh winter conditions. At the beginning of the trip, the hikers appeared cheerful and confident. Photographs later recovered from their cameras show them smiling, joking with one another, and building camps in the snowy wilderness. They carefully recorded their progress in diaries, writing about the landscape, the weather, and the excitement of their adventure. Nothing in those early days suggested that their expedition would soon turn into one of the most mysterious tragedies of the 20th century. However, as the group pushed deeper into the mountains, the environment became increasingly hostile. The temperatures dropped dramatically, and strong winds swept across the open slopes. Snowstorms sometimes made it difficult to see more than a few meters ahead, forcing the hikers to move slowly and carefully. During the early days of the expedition, one member of the group, Yuri Yudin, began to feel seriously ill. He suffered from joint pain and exhaustion that made it difficult for him to continue the journey safely. Realizing that the conditions ahead would only become more dangerous, he made the difficult decision to turn back and return home. He said goodbye to the rest of the team, watching them continue their journey deeper into the mountains. At the time, none of them could have imagined that this decision would save his life. The remaining 9 hikers continued their expedition. By the end of January, they approached a barren mountain known as Kholat Syakhl.
The name came from the language of the local Mansi people and was often translated as Dead Mountain. The slopes of this mountain were exposed to powerful winds, and there were few trees to provide shelter from the freezing weather. On February 1st, the hikers attempted to cross the mountain, but the weather began to worsen. Snowstorms reduced visibility, and it appears the group may have become slightly disoriented while navigating the open terrain. Instead of descending toward the nearby forest for protection, they ended up setting up camp on the exposed slope of the mountain. Although it was not the safest location, experienced hikers sometimes made similar decisions to avoid losing progress along their route. The team dug into the snow to secure their tent against the wind and prepared to spend the night there before continuing their journey the next morning. Sometime during the dark hours of that night, something happened that would forever remain a mystery. At some point, the hikers suddenly left their tent in extreme haste. Investigators later concluded that the group had cut their way out of the tent from the inside, suggesting that whatever frightened them occurred quickly and left them no time to gather their belongings. Boots, warm coats, and important equipment were left behind inside the tent.
After escaping the tent, the hikers moved down the slope toward the forest about a kilometer away. The footprints discovered in the snow indicated that they walked together as a group, although the tracks suggested urgency. It was clear that they believed leaving the tent immediately was their only option. When they reached the edge of the forest, two of the hikers attempted to start a fire beneath a tall cedar tree. Broken branches high up in the tree indicated that one of them had climbed it, possibly trying to look back toward the mountain and see what had happened at the campsite. Those two hikers were the first bodies discovered by search teams. They were lying near the remains of the fire they had built, their clothing thin and inadequate for the freezing temperatures. Their hands showed signs of frostbite and injury, suggesting they had struggled to survive in the brutal cold. Further searches revealed 3 more bodies between the cedar tree and the location of the tent. It appeared these hikers had attempted to make their way back to the camp, perhaps realizing they would not survive long without their warm clothing and supplies. The final 4 members of the expedition were not discovered until several months later, when the snow began to melt. Their bodies were found in a small ravine covered by deep snow. Unlike the others, these hikers had suffered severe internal injuries that baffled medical examiners. One had a fractured skull, while others had broken ribs so powerful that investigators compared the damage to the kind caused by a violent car accident. Even more mysterious was the fact that these injuries showed very little external damage. There were no obvious wounds that could explain the powerful forces that had crushed their bodies. Investigators worked for months trying to determine what happened on that lonely mountainside. One early theory suggested that the hikers had been caught in an avalanche. According to this idea, a sudden movement of snow might have threatened the tent, forcing them to escape quickly before the slope collapsed. However, some experts later questioned this explanation. The slope where the tent was pitched did not appear steep enough to easily trigger a large avalanche, and the tent itself had not been buried under heavy snow. Other theories suggested the possibility of secret military tests in the region. During that time, the Soviet Union was conducting many experimental weapons programs, and some witnesses in nearby areas reported seeing strange glowing lights in the sky around the same period as the tragedy. There were also scientific explanations involving powerful wind patterns. Some researchers suggested that strong winds moving across the mountain could have created a phenomenon known as infrasound.
These low-frequency vibrations are sometimes capable of producing feelings of fear, anxiety, or panic in humans. If the hikers experienced such a phenomenon during the night, it might have caused sudden terror that drove them out of their tent without fully understanding why. Over the years, many other theories have been proposed. Some people have suggested encounters with unknown creatures, while others have speculated about paranormal events or unexplained natural forces. None of these ideas, however, have ever been proven. Decades later, the story of Dyatlov Pass continues to fascinate investigators, historians, and mystery enthusiasts around the world. The combination of strange evidence, unexplained injuries, and unanswered questions has kept the case alive in the public imagination. The mountains themselves remain quiet and unchanged. Winds still sweep across the slopes of Kalatsiak, covering the ground with fresh layers of snow each winter. The place where the hikers once set up their tent is now known around the world as Dyatlov Pass, named after the young leader who guided his team into the wilderness. Despite modern investigations and advanced technology, the exact events of that February night in 1959 remain unknown. Something frightened 9 experienced hikers so badly that they abandoned their shelter and ran into the freezing darkness without their boots or supplies. Their footprints in the snow told the story of their final moments as they moved away from the safety of their camp and into the silent forest below. More than 60 years later, the mystery of Dyatlov Pass still remains unsolved, leaving behind one of the most haunting questions in modern history. What really happened on that frozen mountainside?